Thanks everyone for coming to this chat about the LinkedIn Labyrinth, how to talk about UX in a professional world. And I can see from the chat that we already have people joining, so this seems to be working. This is a first for me to do something like this on LinkedIn. I think some of the others have done similar things before. I've never actually run the technical side. I've been invited on some of these, but this is the first time I'm actually pushing the buttons. So anyways, I'm very excited for everyone to be here. This is a gathering of what we casually call the Doctors of UX. So today we have with us Dr. Nick Fine, Dr. Ari Zelmanov, and Dr. Giles Morrison. And I hope I didn't completely butcher the names. So thanks everyone for making the time to come here. And we did want to chat today about what it means to be posting about UX on LinkedIn. And that also is supposed to chat a little bit about the issues that come with posting in a public forum and the feedback that we get, and so kind of working through that. So maybe as a jumping off point for everyone to comment on, as we were posting the event publicly on LinkedIn, we did receive some feedback, that this might be sort of a bit of a sausage fest, and it is summer barbecue time, but it was not intentional for us to make this an all-male panel and to push forward any agenda. The idea is really, it's a bunch of people. We know each other. We've talked to each other. I think we're very interested in each other's stuff that we're posting in LinkedIn, and so we just kind of wanted to take some time to chat about this publicly. So again, this was just to be a casual hangout, and we were just kind of hoping to share some of that, some of these insights with you. And we're inviting, of course, everyone to step up and post something in the chat with us, and hopefully, we'll get some feedback and some insights from you. We're super open to that, and very excited for everyone that's coming and sharing some of those insights with us. It's really just sort of a learning opportunity for all of us. I just wanted to put that out there. We have no intentions to segregate anyone here. So that being said, maybe we'll kick it off, and maybe I'll hand it over to Nick and Ari to chat a little bit about, because they're coming off of a course that they were advertising on LinkedIn, and maybe to chat a little bit about what that was like, this kind of experience of, advertising your own product on LinkedIn and then working with those followers and gathering the feedback as you're sharing your knowledge. So maybe Nick, you can go for it first, and then we'll do Ari after, and start with that.
Sure. As you guys probably all know, you learn the most when you're teaching. And I think Ari and I have been learning an awful lot. I think it was the most incredibly rewarding experience, and we got amazing feedback from our cohorts. What can I tell you? What specifically are you after, Leonard?
Oh, sorry, I muted my mic. So one of the things that I was wondering is how difficult is it when all of us are kind of used to sharing knowledge on LinkedIn, and just do that because we do want to learn and educate at the same time. But once we're starting to commercialize it, things do tend to change a little bit, because all of a sudden we might get that vibe of maybe we're marketing, or, like maybe we're advertising something here, where really this idea of building a digital product is also to help people learn and grow. So I just kind of wondered if you've encountered a shift of mindset when you're posting specifically about the digital product versus your regular posts, where you're kind of, going back and forth between some of the things that you're experiencing and sharing with other people on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I mean, I think I speak for Ari as well as myself. And the reason for creating a course like that was to educate the market, which there was a strong need in the world for what we were teaching. How does that cross with the messages that I put across onto LinkedIn? I think it's complementary, to be honest. And again, Ari's got his own answers, but I think it supports what we both do. And it's just externalizing it and making it accessible to people so that we can share our successes with the wider world. It was, I'll be really honest, it was uncomfortable for me, and I think probably Ari too, being such publicists, because it's not really my homeland. It's not really what I'm expert in. It's not my thing. But we both had a good go at marketing, you know, and promotions. And we got some nice comments from conference owners and people like that. You know, we did some interesting stuff. I think it's a necessary evil. That's where I'll leave it on. I mean, we can't leave the world in an uneducated state. And I don't want to go full commercial either. I'd rather just get on and be me, but we can't. So there's this kind of balancing act going on. Ari, what do you think?
I think I'd make 3 points. One, to address what Leonard said in the very beginning about comments. It's striking to me how a profession that touts itself on empathy starts with comments that are backbiting in nature rather than seeking to understand. Now, one of those comments said was a female or somebody else invited, or how did this come to be, or I'd love to come speak. Instead, it started at attacking. And I think that's one of the problems on social media with conversations and debate and discourse. And I think it goes back to what Nick was saying. We put on a course that helped people present, defend, and a point of view and negotiate an outcome based upon a knowledge that was science backed. Marketing, we as people on LinkedIn feel like we have to be apologetic for marketing. And what I'd say is I'm unapologetically marketing, because I believe that what Nick and I offered and continue to offer, both of us, independent and together, helps people become better researchers. And if I truly believe that, if I believe that at my core, it's my ethical and fiduciary responsibility to get that to people so it can help them grow their careers. My mission is to up-level research and researchers. And by doing so, it's my hope that we reduce layoffs, we increase value in organizations, we help people get better, more promotions, we expand the scope of research, all of those things. And I don't think you can do that without marketing. By just talking about those things, it's not enough to just talk about them. There's a lot of noise on social media, and there's a lot of the way the algorithms work and the way that your posts are seen. If you just post something, it's seen by a very small fraction of people. You have to be pretty consistent. I think those are my initial thoughts on the question.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you very much, both of you, for that feedback. I think we do want to dive a little bit deeper in that way of how we're structuring our posts and how we're doing sort of this. I think it's edutainment almost, right? Like it's educational entertainment somehow, because we're trying to get that engagement, because that's the only way to get past the algorithm to get viewed. And then on the other hand, we do want to make sure that we're educating people at the same time. I mean, this is kind of at the heart of it. And I did want to put forward that question to Giles a little bit and get a little bit of feedback there. What do you think has worked really well for you? Because you mentioned to us recently, you changed a little bit of your posting strategy in the last half year-ish, or almost last year, right? And so what did you think worked well and didn't work well as you were sharing your insights with the UX crowd? And you're in a very specific niche of UX, right? Because you do fuse that medical knowledge with the UX knowledge. And that's such a wonderful space to be. So do you have a feeling it's a little bit different there? Maybe a little bit less marketing, a little bit more marketing? Maybe share some of your experiences.
Yeah, so I've had quite a lot of life events. The devastating one was actually the loss of my sister. She passed away from idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis lung condition. But then I also became a father last year. My daughter turned 1 just only a couple of weeks before we done this recording. So a combination of those life events has led me to be less vocal on LinkedIn. I'm still on there very regularly, to be honest. But to your point about the type of content that I put out there and the posts. So most of my content really is around user experience design in healthcare. I tend to comment more than post these days, again, because of me not being on LinkedIn as much. I also talk quite a bit about anti-racism. That's normally done by reposting other content that I found really put out useful, really informative. It tends to be content that's from Americans, They tend to put a lot of effort into this because it's such a huge issue for them out there. But in principle, those are two main topics. Now, I don't market myself as an anti-racist professional in a sense, so that's not the way I earn my living. But I do make it clear that I am anti-racist. I've got a personal stake in this game. But also I think it's important to be part of that narrative. With regards to healthcare UX and clinical UX, my posts and even comments, they tend to be less marketing heavy because of the fact that it's so niche. There are times I'm being very explicit, like where we've got opportunity for new students for my clinical UX course, then I will be a little bit more like, here's call to action to a landing page to find out more about it. Or sometimes not. And even recently though, with like UX mentoring and coaching, which isn't just for healthcare UX professionals, I might be specific in, be directed to a landing page, book a free consultation call to see if it's a good fit, talk through what package or service. So I think what's most important really is that you provide value. You share content, you share opinions, whether it's positive or negative, because constructive feedback doesn't have to be purely positive feedback. There's times you have to actually explain something that's not quite right, but it can still be done constructively. When you're focusing on adding value, just being part of what's useful for our community, people will respect you. And if you've got a service that they are willing to pay for, want to engage with, then it will follow through. I don't think you should completely rely on just providing loads of great content if you have something. You have to also tell people you have something to sell. Otherwise, they may never know. And that could be the first time they even hear of you. But I personally have found it's quite good just being honest, genuine, showing my passion and interest in my field. And that just kind of sorts out the rest with people deciding to want to work with me, or even know me for that matter.
I love that. This actually brings us nicely into another question that I have for all of you, which is this discrepancy that we experience as social media creators when we want to be, on the one hand, very genuine. We want to be ourselves, but on the other hand, we're also public facing. And I think actually I listened to a podcast episode from Arvid Kahl. You might know him. He's like an entrepreneur, kind of solopreneur guy. And he talked about this discrepancy between being yourself and being the persona that you have, that is sort of this educator persona where you're trying to teach people. So, it's a very interesting fine line that we have to wander between, being ourselves and sharing that personality and then sharing all that knowledge. And I noticed that specifically with Nick's posts, he recently had this, what do you call it? The Positive Friday. And we saw you so happy and smiling in these videos. And it's a joy to see those pop up in my feed. I always get a smile when I see you like being happy and being like encouraging people for positivity. I think that's super awesome. So, maybe let's start with you. Like, where did that idea come from? And that's, I think, also like a very personal thing from you to say, I just want to share some positivity with the world.
Yeah. Cutting straight to the chase, because as a neurodiverse individual, I've masked and done all that stuff. We don't need to go into that, right? But I came to a dawning, an absolute epiphany. I can't tell you how many years ago, where there was my public self and my real self, and they were different people. And it made me miserable because I was always trying to be somebody else, this normal person on the outside, and it drove me nuts. It's the same thing with a LinkedIn persona and the real you. There is only me. All you see is me. I don't think twice, which is why I get into as much trouble as I do win, because you just get straight through. You get no filter type stuff. Some professional filters, obviously, but my language and some of the things that I say, obviously, I'm not really pre-processing it too much or anything. You know what I'm saying? And as Giles was just saying, I mean, that's my secret sauce, or that's the hallmark of my brand, which I hate that shit, is just me being me. I say what I think. I say it straight. People don't necessarily agree with it. That's fine. That's just what I feel. I had a post this week. You guys must have seen it. It went ballistic. And I knocked that out quickly at 9:30 in the morning, and then ran to the tube to go into the office. When I got into the office, my phone was trying to go out the tunnel. My phone was going like mental. I had 85 friend requests and blah, 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 blah. And that's my point is by saying something quickly and just getting it out through, you're not thinking, you're not overthinking it. You're just putting down what you need to say. And it's always the quiet ones. Well, it's that I didn't expect that. I did not expect like 375,000 impressions or something mental. It's huge. I hit gold in terms of my honesty, my frustration, my anxiety, whatever you call that, is resonating with other people who relate. They have the same anxiety on the same topic at scale, which for me is very validating. It gets me out of jail for all the other shit that I talk. But yeah, so that's basically where it's at. I'm me. And that's where I encourage my children to be, because they are Gen Alpha and whatever down there. If they grow up in this world of having one persona for socials and one persona for home, mental health goes out the window fast. And my mental health is not index linked with my followers or anything else on LinkedIn or any social media for that matter. And that's critically important. Like, if everybody went away, I don't care. I've got a day job, I've got a family, I've got friends, you know what I mean? It doesn't change me. It doesn't make me who I am. It's nice to be able to brag, I've got 25,000 followers, blah, blah, blah. But that's just window dressing. It's bullshit. It's not real. If it paid me, it would make a different story. But it doesn't pay me, right? If LinkedIn disappeared tomorrow, we all carry on.
I love that. That's a really interesting point, given that those of us who are on Twitter yesterday, when Threads was announced, the new Instagram social app, there was this whole rupture of like, okay, so those people that have curated their Twitter following, what if it disappears tomorrow because Elon pushes a button or something like that? And, then you got to build an audience there as well. So I think it is an interesting segue, because you say like, I'm not actually making any money off of it. And this is actually where I want to move it over to Ari, because I know Ari definitely knows how to productize things. And I think that like your intention with building a following and an audience on LinkedIn was very much similar to when I started, where I'm like, this is great, but I also, part of me is doing this because I want to build a digital business around this. So maybe some thoughts from you, Ari, in terms of like, how does that look like if you want to go about it more with a business strategy in the back of your head?
I think there's a few things to that. One is, first of all, I think that you have to use the play from Nick's playbook, and that is you have to be authentically you, and you have to appreciate. There's a few things. One is you need to know what your objective is here. So you're going to see people on LinkedIn who have like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of followers, and they're posting selfies of themselves, and they're posting like content that's all over the place. Like Nick, if you analyze Nick's posts, you'll see that, yes, he is authentically himself, but he talks specifically about specific categories, which leads to being able to productize something. That's an important component. But you also know that Nick's audience is relevant to Nick. Some of these when you generally post like dog walking or food, yeah, you're going to get a lot of followers, but those are not going to be people who are ultimately going to buy from you. And one of the things that Nick says that he almost talked about it as a net positive, a net negative, but I think is actually a net positive is, yes, it attracts people that love Nick and it repels people that don't. Same thing happens with me. Like I have people who don't like me. They block me. They stop following me. They don't like how pointy I am. They don't like what I say. Great. Don't follow me. Don't subscribe to my list. Don't buy my stuff. You're not my people. But the people who do subscribe to me are my people. And I think that's the mindset you have to go in with, is that we're not here for vanity. We're here because we're trying to grow a business. But you have to also recognize that growing a business doesn't mean that I'm just trying to sling any product, service, anything that I can build to make a dollar. It's I am legitimately trying to serve people and make them better researchers. I'm helping. Right now, if you look at my posts over the last week, I am really, really hitting hard on this idea of strategic insight and foresight teams, centralized research teams, blowing up UX research. These are things that I'm talking about right now because I believe that they're better for the industry, they're better for the people, they're better for the whole. I'm trying to make my dent in the universe by making things better. But the objective of that has to be finding relevant people who want to hear or not only hear what I have to say, but be engaged in a conversation. And being engaged in the conversation to Giles' point, it doesn't mean that we have to agree. It doesn't mean we have to come to consensus. It can mean that we disagree. It just means that we disagree on certain things. People and I disagree about democratization all the time, and that's okay. I have some friends who are way pro democratization. That's cool. We don't have to agree on that issue. And then finally, I would tell everybody that's thinking about this kind of stuff exactly what you said, Leonard, and that's you have to be cautious about the platform. Tomorrow, if LinkedIn shut me off, what do I do? And so I'm diversifying with a YouTube channel this year. I played with Threads for 5 minutes yesterday before I turned it off. I'm just not interested. It blows me away because everybody's trying to be the next Twitter instead of being the first whatever platform it is. And it shows that there's this gap that people miss that Twitter experience. But let's be really candid about what happened to Twitter. Twitter, as we knew it, is gone. It's done. It's going to die. It's still got millions of users. But it's not what it was. And so this is when innovation happens. This is when there's a gap. People are going to find some innovative person is going to find an angle that is different, and they're going to build something hopefully better that is not Twitter, but is the first best something else.
Yeah, I like that. Recently I experienced that. I had like a semi-viral thing on Twitter, and what I usually experience on Twitter, as soon as something hits a number of views, it's not the same as LinkedIn where you're actually happy about it, but you're actually getting sad about it because it literally alerts all the trolls to come and dunk on you. And that's pretty much what happens for the next couple of days. It's just a bunch of people telling you you're wrong, you're doing it wrong, everything is horrible. What kind of horrible stuff are you putting out there? So that's my experience with Twitter anyways, but Nick, maybe you have different experience.
But who cares, Leonard? Who cares? That's the important part, right? And that's kind of what Ari was saying. It doesn't make any difference because we're all older and we remember a world pre this, but the younger world thinks that everybody can see everything. And then, and they're starting to think about what does everybody think about me and blah, 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 blah. Who cares? And that's what we have to get into younger generations. It isn't about people pleasing an entire society or an entire practice. Right? There are people who are not going to agree and disagree, and that's kind of okay. It depends on which issue it is at what time, whether you agree or disagree, right? You know what I mean?
And I'd like to add, because I think Nick is on the right thing. The other thing I would say, and it ties back to how we started this conversation today, is just because somebody comments on something you say or somebody does something doesn't mean you have to respond. Your comment is yours. My response is mine. And sometimes if I'm not responding, it's because I'm not honoring the comment. And if it's really trolly, I didn't do this until last week, and I don't know why I didn't do it. But if you put a really trolly comment on a post, I'll just delete it. It's not a comment. I put very clearly, if you want to have a conversation or a debate with me, I am happy to meet with anybody, discuss, debate, have a respectful dialogue about where I'm coming from. But if you're putting something on there, like there's this dude that owns a company that uses AI for research. I'm trying not to mention his name here because I don't think it's
we all know it.
But he's a trolly dude. So cool. Not going to respond to anything that dude says anymore. Nothing.
Yep.
Yeah, Giles, maybe you had something to say there as well.
Yeah. First thing, the Giles is with a J sound. Giles.
Oh, sorry. I keep messing that up. That's my European name accent.
So I'm not surprised. Yeah. But anyway, so there's a few things that comes to mind. The big one, because there's always going to be times where people can leave comments where they may not be trying to be trolls, but they are not happy and they are expressing that. So as you highlighted earlier on, there has been some comments about the fact that it's just men that's in this discussion, but we happen to know each other, so I like to do this session. And I liken it to a situation where I felt like there was a lot of Black professionals or those wanting to get into UX design who identify as Black and feeling quite lonely. And when I started out, and in fact, I'm going to just get it out to do, there's a blog post I need to post one of these days about the fact that very often I'm the only black person in the room in my line of work. So it's not just that I'm the only UX professional and I happen to be black. I mean, like, there's nobody else who's black in the room. But that's a separate point. But because I was sensitive to that, I was like, if there's anybody who sees themselves as black and they want to get into UX, they want to talk to other black people that are doing UX, let's have a chat. There's a blog. Posted this, I feel like it was just after Christmas, but in 2021. By the beginning of January, I decided that the group's so big, we're going to have to create a LinkedIn group for this. And that's what Bert posted, like UX Society. Now, the point of me discussing all of this is to highlight that I recognize that I'm not the only person that feels the way that I do. Let me speak to other people that feel the way that I do and see what we can do together. That's then led to a group that's, nearly 2,000 people. All quite organic, the way sometimes it's people being personally invited, but it's grown quite organically. And because it's a LinkedIn group, it's not always constructive conversation. Like UX, there's not always loads and loads of people commenting, but still those people have the ability to connect with each other. And I find that's something that we need to do more. I'm not saying don't be upset that you're not getting experience that you would like. You're free to have an emotional response. We're human beings. It's not, well, what are you now going to do about it? And sometimes it's about actually finding your tribe. It's a very, very simple activity to just connect with like-minded. That's literally, we have created our own tribe, the Doctors of UX. It doesn't mean that you have to be a male and be a doctor to be in this group. I think being a doctor is perhaps a prerequisite. And I'm the, somewhat odd one out having a medical degree.
You're the only real doctor.
It's just testament to, the fact that we come from an academic background, which does have quite a lot of impact on the way that we conduct UX work, whether it's research, whether it's design. There's an academic foundation that we build on top of and work from. And so that's one tribe. There's people who they just connect because they're purely visual designers. There's people who just connect because they are doctors, because they're astronauts, because they're teachers. Have your tribe. And even within all those, there's a version that's divided, a subsection of those groups because of race, because of sexuality, because of religion. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a good thing to do because it allows people who can feel a bit lonely with the way that they identify to connect with other people and realize you're not alone anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the problems that we have with communicating on LinkedIn is that there's times where people are commenting because they actually want to connect with their tribe, and perhaps the way that they're communicating, they're not connected with their tribe. It requires some effort. It requires still networking ultimately, which you can do on LinkedIn.
And you know what compounds that, Giles? That UX tends to be kind of a more nomadic or kind of lone wolf kind of existence. Not always. People do exist in teams, but certainly in a post-pandemic world, and the user researcher in particular, it is a lonely life. And so if you haven't got a tribe, it's very, very lonely. Do you know what I'm saying? I totally get that. One thing though, about the disagreement stuff, there are some very high-profile LinkedIners out there who say really good stuff on broad stuff, but they're kind of populists, should we say? They're looking for the popular vote. If you do comment, and I commented on one of them about something that was factually incorrect, that was in my psychology wheelhouse. It was actually my subject of my PhD thesis, so I can't let something like that go. It's so specialized, and I think he made a claim something about like personality changing regularly. I was like, dude, no, personality is temporarily stable, or at least most of the literature supports that, right? And he basically, I got called a jerk because I dared to to give a factual rebuttal against something else. And this is kind of talking to, I think, what Leonard was saying, or Giles, what you were just saying. And we should probably talk about this. What is the role of PhD, academics, science, scientific method, whatever? What is the value of that moving forwards? Because I think what we've seen here is a catastrophic failure through commercialization and mass UX, right? Mass UX broke, UX, UI, design thinking, all that shit. and teams have been fired and stuff. There's definitely a reconfiguration or a reconsideration going on in the world today. If it is to be reborn, where is our role, or anybody with a master's degree or a bachelor's degree in a relevant thing? Where do they, I think that's a big question to ask, or it maybe not for now, for another time, but I think it's huge, because I'll leave it on this. My personal view is that misinformation is at an all-time high because of internet and stuff, right? If misinformation is the noise, we as PhDs and other researchers are the filters of misinformation and information.
Yeah.
And if you don't have trained researchers filtering, the future of society is in big trouble. That's my view, but I'd love to know what you guys think. Am I militant, or are you with me? I don't know.
Yeah, I want to build on that, because especially in my field in healthcare, there isn't enough of us specializing in healthcare. Now, you don't have to come from a clinical background to work in UX in healthcare. It helps, but of course, there's a whole host of learning. Like, it's a complete other profession. Yes, there's a lot of knowledge that's transferable, separate to actual medical knowledge that is directly applied to projects. I mean, the whole problem-solving process is what you're taught as definitely a doctor. Most other clinicians that have to do direct care with patients, you have to understand problem-solving processes and tools and techniques to solve problems. Our concept of triangulation, the whole idea of primary and secondary research. You have to know this stuff to do good work in medicine. And so it's completely transferable to UX, but still it's another profession. Now, I find, though, that there's still this general narrative that working in healthcare is the same as working in any other industry. Now, there's some aspects that's true, like applying heuristics, for example, but a concept of piece of my work that I do as a clinical UX professional in this field is looking at clinical risk. So it's not just, people could be confused because this term is a bit ambiguous on this button. I mean, you've changed a process that's fundamentally going to put a patient more at risk because you've shifted responsibility to them to improve their health, but not in a way that they fully accept it. I've literally seen digital therapeutics products given to patients where they're supposed to be more in charge of their health, but there isn't the safety netting or just the simple service layer involved with it to really protect the patient. And so by scaling that out, you're introducing opportunity for harm. This is a piece that could become an epidemic, the clinical risk that's raised here. And just knowing good UX doesn't necessarily mean that you would gather enough research findings to say, yeah, I identified it. It's actually a slightly different way of assessing the data based on my medical training. Now, someone can be trained to do that without having to be a doctor. That's why I train people to be in clinical UX. But it's just, to your point, Dr. Nick, the fact that there's going to be a lot of people who just aren't aware of how much knowledge they need to do the work in a variety of industries, not just in healthcare. And so you have to have people who have got deep knowledge, sharing their insights, teaching and training others. Otherwise, the quality of the output of these professionals is just going to degrade over time. Like there's no reason to think it's going to get better over time, because if the next generation aren't being trained up and then they train the next generation, like if anything, there's going to be degradation of knowledge if we don't have standards. So, and I've seen this, I've seen people really trivialize the fact that ethics is a massive component of healthcare UX. There's like the whole idea of saying, as a patient, you now should go to your phone to improve your health rather than calling your doctor. You're going to use this AI-empowered chatbot to get answers about how to do it. This is a massive ethical dilemma, because actually, even if the AI is perfect, let's just assume, we know it's not, but let's assume it is. Is it right to tell someone that they shouldn't speak to a human being to get help? Like, really can put someone off and delay their ability to seek help as early as possible, rather than because they're just so sick. So is it right for us to be using the AI chatbot in that situation? For some people, it might be. For all people, it might not be. But where's been the opportunity during that whole iterative design process, whether it's the research, the actual design work, development work, where someone was like, what's the ethical considerations of what we're doing? I've already had a brief chat online. People weren't talking about the ethics. It never came up.
What happens legally, or at least I know for the US, which is very litigious, when the first AI doctor or AI triage death or misadvent, but the bad thing happens, right? Then the lawyers and everything comes in, and then that changes the entire world, doesn't it? Medico-legal.
Yes. And the thing is, we shouldn't have to wait until the law steps in. That's why I love the space of ethics, because if you've dealt with ethics well, you're actually preventing us having to bring this to the courts, because that's what a lot of times laws are created, is because of an ethical consideration that no one can have a consensus on. It's just like, well, the law says this, therefore everyone's going to just do this. Sometimes it's obvious, like murder in principle should be considered illegal. But the whole idea of telling everybody to use AI in their everyday lives, because we haven't seen enough bad experiences, we're like, we'll allow it type attitude. And it needs to be more carefully considered. So get back to the point of, we need to have experts about this stuff and actually having an academic reason, like the evidence base for what we're saying. Because even if the evidence base doesn't come from someone that's got a PhD about it, that's fine. I just care that the evidence can be trusted, that is valid, that is reliable. And that's what's missing from a lot of the stuff we're seeing on LinkedIn about UX. It's not coming from an evidence base. It's coming from someone else said it and they just made it up sometimes. That's fine.
It's remix culture, right? Like there's a lot of remixing happening of existing stuff without vetting. So there's less vetting, more remixing. But Ari, I think you wanted to chime in on that.
No, but I think it goes to what you're saying. And my question to everybody here is this. There's two, is I agree with this idea of provenance. And I agree with like, there are certain things that require a higher level of certainty. But when you talk about a post on LinkedIn, like how deep do you really go? Like, like I post a lot of things. I'm not going to put a sources cited or a citation page at the end of that. But I also, I think if you make a claim like this, ready, here's a bullshit claim. I'm saying bullshit ahead of time because I want everybody to know that behavioral economics is 100% certain to change consumer behavior. That's bullshit. Making that claim is objectively wrong. But I'm going to make another claim that to me is grounded in a lot of experience. But how much provenance do I have to do? Building a new research team requires organizational change and requires the establishment of solid research methods and a research methodology. It requires two things. One alone doesn't do that. Now that's from experience building teams at Panasonic, Indeed, Twilio, GTM Hub, Twitter before Musk fucked it up. All of those things, those are two different statements, but how much provenance, I'm kicking this back to you guys, how much provenance do I need? Or is it part of it in that you look at my background and experience, you see that, oh wait, this is an experienced practitioner and you need to consider the source better? Because I agree that this is a problem. I just don't know how to solve it.
You can't solve it, Ari. None of us can. I think it has to happen at grassroots levels at schools. We call it critical thinking these days, but we're talking about science. But whatever you call that, the idea that before I eat something, I stop and think, where did this information come from? But do I want to inhale this? Do I want to ingest this? Well, people are eating the equivalent of crap out of the gutter or, out of the dustbin or just random stuff daily, and they're building themselves and they're getting really sick off of it. And I don't... Look, Ari and I have done lots of educational work. I'm out there all day screaming about science. I've been screaming scientific design, the science of UX for over 5 or 6 years, UX psychology, which I created. You know what I'm saying? It's all there to bring all this stuff to the table. The problem is when I say the people, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, the scale of the problem is so big that we can't educate the world fast enough to stop and think. So to your point, Ari, if people were critical thinkers, they would look for a reference and go, where's the provenance of your claim? And then I can backtrack it and all that great stuff that we do by default. But no one does that. I mean, I know you guys do it because I'm pretty sure you're much like me. Whenever I meet anybody, I'm checking them out on LinkedIn. I want to know, what do you know? How do you know it? How long have you been doing it? All of that stuff. Because I can't see somebody without knowing that about them. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's not a problem that we can solve. I think we've got to stay super vocal and keep educating. But I think it's about the next generations. I think these are kind of lost generations, unfortunately.
Well, I think if I may chime in there with an idea, I think you're completely right. It is about educating, but it's also about learning at the same time, because this is something that people may not understand. Just because we have a PhD or an MD, and because we do have a lot of knowledge that we're willing to share, and that we want to get the feedback on. Sometimes we're also still learning things as we're sharing them, and we're understanding. I mean, all of us had to learn copywriting and this whole idea of like, how do we massage our ideas in a way that the public will understand and will vibe with us, and specifically when it comes to new technologies. And this is where it gets interesting. I think we can take that as a jumping off point, because it relates to what Amy and Will were posting in the chat, where it's just like AI is everywhere. We need to think about AI in some way. And Amy said AI should assist in medical decisions, not servicing patients. And Will said, we need to make sure that AI does have tremendous potential, but it should be seen as a tool that enhances healthcare rather than replace human expertise and judgment. I think that is true for all of us, as and I know Nick's been posting about this quite a bit with the ChatGPT experiments and things like that. And I might not post about it as much, but I use it every day too. And I'm trying to make this stuff work in a way that is ethical, responsible, but also enhances the way I've done things in the past. And there are a lot of things that make that a little bit easier, and that can streamline some of the processes that we used to do by hand. So definitely an advancement that happens there. So I think we are not just the people that give instructions, but we are also at the same point, we're kind of like guides, right? Like we may guide people along as we're figuring this stuff out ourselves, because nobody educated us on how to use AI. I mean, none of us knew how to do this a year ago, right? So we're just figuring this stuff out as we go along. We're trying to be conscientious in the way that we're sharing that with the audience. And I would say we do try to apply the scientific principles that we have been taught in terms of how we vet our own work, right? And I think that's one of the advantages that you get when you talk to a doctor, and where this whole funny moniker, the doctors of UX, came from. It's like we've all had some sort of scientific training, and we may be away from that a couple of years, but we still do remember it, and we still try to apply it in some way to the stuff that we say. So I don't know, Giles or others. Ari,
those science things are baked into me and you and Giles and Ari. I know you maybe don't even know it, but they are. You can't take those lenses out. Like they're in. Once they're installed, the doors of perception are wide open, and you ain't closing them. And that's what we need the rest of the world to be a bit more like, if you know what I mean. And I'm not saying PhD level, just questioning, more curious, more cynical in a positive way.
Yeah, I really, really resonate with what you've just said there, because I remember I learned the term triangulation, this whole concept of having two or more sources of truth come to the same conclusion. And I was about 14 years old when I learned that. This wasn't even university, but it stuck with me, because I realized I do the same thing in medicine, I do the same thing in UX. Yeah, and it's this idea of applying a scientific approach that's really, really important. Otherwise, how can you trust what you're doing? Like, literally, there's stuff I work on where if it's done wrong, someone could harm themselves or die. From the beginning of my career, in situations like this. And we're like, well, it's just information about the patient on the system. They're still in the hospital. They'll still be seen. It's like, well, if the clinicians trust this information, then why would they question it and then go and get new data to then check on the patient? They could just deteriorate and die. And it's this fact that has been discussed a few times in this talk so far, the fact that if we don't share these sorts of concerns, or even just ideas, if you don't have a strong evidence to situate yet, there isn't the discussions, or at least the trigger for people to learn more, which can include ourselves. The fact that I've spoken so much over the years about clinical UX being distinct from healthcare UX, like the design of products and services for clinicians and EMs, it's forced me to identify and articulate what is that difference. Because if I can't articulate it, then of course I'm a fraud, which I'm not. But also, how would anybody else be able to learn? But it's forced me to really accept that clinical risk is a massive part of what I have to look for. Being the voice that talks about healthcare ethics, that's something that is missing most of the time. Really being inclusive, which goes beyond just things. Have we considered race? Have we considered disability? There's sexuality, there's religion, there's subtleties in culture that can be often forgotten. Just where is the trigger to get people thinking about this? And so the point I'm making here is that it's through these discussions that we as, so I'll have experts, I don't use that label because I'm just learning all the time, but the point is someone who can impart a lot of knowledge to others, someone who does teach. We still learn. And it's important that we still learn and encourage those that we're teaching to still learn as well. Otherwise, again, our craft will degrade. It will just get worse over time.
I agree with that. And I think one of the things that Nick taught in in every cohort that we've put on is that you have to accept the premise that you could be wrong. That's what science says. So what I think is important to note is that in the world that we work in with levels of certainty, all of us, none of us do anything with absolute certainty. Even clinical and medical UX, there is a margin of error. We could be wrong. And just because you say something is 99% sure, that still means there's 1% that it's unsure. And that 1% can happen. It's based on probability theory. Well, I think that's important is everybody wants this certainty, this sure thing, this framework that works for everything. And if that were the case, then every company would just use Apple's playbook and be wildly fucking successful. But that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because there are uncertain conditions. There's ever-changing things in the world, and that's okay. I think part of developing this level of comfort is presenting a position and then being willing to change. A real example of this is, I would say 2 to 3 years ago, I was absolutely in the pro-democratization camp. I thought, this is a good thing because it allows businesses to do more with less. I absolutely, as new information became available to me, am in the opposite camp. Does that make me put me in a weaker position? I don't think so. I think it's the contrary. It's the ability to evaluate evidence and change your mind over time as you learn new things. That is and I think that's the takeaway from this, is that it's cool to change your mind as new evidence becomes available, and it doesn't make you less of an academic, a practitioner, insert whatever phrase here.
Dude, one of the sexiest things that we never hear anymore is people saying, I don't know. Right? Yeah. People feel obliged to say some shit, and it's usually shit like GPT does. But dude, to just backtrack a tiny bit, the great tragedy that's facing all of us is that central truth, and I know there's no truth and it's all subjective, right? But let's just call it truth, right? Or finding out the thing, finding out really highly valid information. There we go. In corporations, in organizations, equals money. Now, it used to be that way. We've lost our way through all good reasons. But connecting the ability to find valid information, which drives money or value, that's what we all have to work to connect. And that's where I see the PhDs and anyone with a more kind of a formal background in understanding the world, which is research, is going to be more needed in a post-truth world. More needed, not less needed. Like if you bin us all, sack us all off, you've got no eyes or ears, and it's the tail wagging the dog, and it goes to hell fast. I couldn't have put many more metaphors in that sentence if I tried, but there we go. Who's next?
I really like that reflection on this, specifically this struggle that you have when you're creating on social media, on a platform where assertiveness is the be all end all. You want to be assertive in your statements. You want to, create this idea that you know what you're talking about, because people hate nothing more than uncertainty. They do want to be certain, and they do want to follow you because you're telling the truth. On the other hand, a lot of the times you just don't know, because you have to make room for that margin of error, because sometimes you're just figuring this stuff out. And I think this is interesting as it relates to medicine, and this might be something for Giles again. There is no margin of error when you're talking about medicine, right? And so as nice as it is for us to play around with AI, and there's a lot of comments about AI in the chat right now, when we're playing around with social media, that room of error for experimentation is not there when you're in the medical process, right? But my question for you, Giles, is that room of error is also not there with UX, and yet we have so many applications with such a horrendous UI, actually. Let's not even talk UX, but even just the UI and the notification overload that you have in a lot of the applications, just because the developers are scared shitless that they might cause a death of a person. So they'll just alert you for everything just in case, so nobody can blame the software developer, right? What is your feeling about that as people are developing medical software, medical digital applications? How do we make room for, on the one hand, experimentation with new stuff, new technology, and on the other hand, making sure that the experience is streamlined and conducive to doing good medical work at the same time?
Yeah, this draws on a topic I was actually teaching a student recently about this: human factors and ergonomics.
Yep.
And Nick knows about this in relation to healthcare from his own studies. It again is another topic that really isn't discussed enough in healthcare. It comes up a lot with medical devices, to be fair. I think it's kind of impossible to put out a medical device, a strict physical medical device, without including human factors and ergonomics. It's just tied in with the way that they are regulated. But software as medical devices, I've never heard anybody explicitly talk about human factors and ergonomics in my time, other than myself. They would always still just talk about usability. And it would often then be more about like the WCAG, the Web Accessibility Guidelines type of thing. And that's not enough. It's part of it for sure. But the human factors and ergonomics, like just the simple change of situation that the clinician has to have data about this patient, who they are familiar with, who they're seeing in a scheduled appointment, versus having to have similar data when the patient is new to them and they've literally just had a heart attack and their heart has stopped. The way that you're going to gather that data, physically gather that data under those conditions, are completely different. And I find that this type of understanding of just the fact that humans are not fallible, they are prone to make mistakes. They're prone to do stuff which goes against their better judgment, what they think that they would do if they were to face their situation. And then just an understanding of the world that they exist in. They live, they have fun, they work in. These things have huge implications on the way that we use the products and services that we have. But no one's talking about this enough. And I think the main reason why they're not talking about it is that technically they can produce a product that will be purchased by a healthcare provider. And I mean provider in the sense of a healthcare institution, not just the individual clinician of whatever grade they are. And the healthcare providers, they've got their checklist from how they're regulated, how they're monitored for their quality. And they're like, well, we've checked the boxes, so this is good enough. And even though it is not a new concept that clinicians are burnt out, particularly doctors burnt to using poorly designed EHR solutions in particular. But no one really cares. Why? Because the doctors are still doing the job. If they were to just stop working, which has been kind of a situation where for another discussion one day, national program for IT was to digitize the NHS. One of the products was an electronic record system called the Lorenzo, and it was not fit for purpose. There'll be times, especially another product, Rio, which is now been put out to be used, where the clinicians will be like, well, I can't fully document what I've done. I can't create a legal record. Therefore, I'm not going to use it. And they just didn't use it. It was rolled out. Don't get me wrong. It was rolled out. It was supposed to be a mandatory tool. But because it wasn't fit for purpose, they refused. So in those circumstances, the providers, the managers of these healthcare providers, they're like, okay, we have to change what we've done here because it's not acceptable. But so many times the staff put up with it, the patients put up with it, even if they're upset, or they at least are able to get the job done. So it's not seen as a failure. Like, I've literally worked on a project. I'm not going to name and shame them. I kind of feel like I should, but I'm not. I'm going to try and be nice. But they only celebrated a product which virtually every staff member of the tool complained about, to the point with some consultants with actively said they would prefer to just write in paper notes and completely bypass this new electronic noting system. And that's not a success because people are using it. So to answer your question, I think because the pain of using the product is not severe enough for managers to be like, this is something we should care about, they don't change it. Like, they're only really driven by money or the law, in that order. Like, if they can avoid doing something with, isn't a legal requirement, they will do so because it's going to help them make money or save money or both. And so what I found in my line of work is I've got to link back the work that I'm doing, the suggestions for redoing the work or going back to the drawing board or at least making a change to how is this going to affect us financially, which being sued is still ultimately a financial cost. Yep. Or terrible brand recognition is a financial cost that's going to be paid. When it goes back to the money, people start changing their attitudes to the whole idea of taking UX seriously.
That's I love this. Like, if we open this can of worms in terms of bullshit corporate UX, in terms of the UX that people talk about versus the UX that is actually UX, I think we'd have another hour. But this might be something where we might just come together and talk about this specific topic, because I think we all have very strong feelings about that.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. I do want to thank all of you. We're kind of at the end of the hour. Nick, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, Giles, for the NHS stuff, I'm betting, so this is pure opinion, I don't know, okay? I'm betting it was all third-party framework type people rather than internal work, which is all GDS assessed, etc. Right?
Most definitely.
It would have been Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I remember when GDS started, the National Programme for IT was coalition government, so just after the millennium started. And it was like, there was times when British Telecom, Kodak were involved, and I'm like, when do you know them to be involved with electronic health records?
Yeah.
So this is the problem, is that it was a load of folks who are outside of healthcare, outside the NHS, which is needed because the NHS, quite frankly, doesn't have the expertise it needs to do all the digital health work it intends to. Even to this day, like I will admit it, I don't believe that they've got enough of the talent that they need. They bring in a lot of experts who don't have any experience with healthcare. Not to say that we don't exist. For whatever reason, they're not hiring them. And so they are relying on third parties. But the third parties are then not bringing in the right people. The third parties are just chasing the money.
That's exactly right. And also, you're probably old enough to remember, we did a big platform shift, I think it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I remember because it was Morse. You remember Morse in the UK? They were a massive integrator. I don't think they're around anymore. Yeah. But it was Morse and 3 or 4 other massive integrators all working together. And, integrators working within themselves is obviously quite a handful. Working with each other on a multi, like super enterprise level kind of thing. It was never really going to happen. And these, it's what I'm saying is it's not usually a failure of user. It is a failure of user centricity, but it's not an internal one. You know what I mean? It's people having a go at UX and not just not involving any kind of clinician or practitioner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think medicine's the only field where that happens. Like getting, stakeholder expertise sometimes, it just gets handed off to design teams separately is definitely definitely not the way to go. You're always, if you don't have the expertise, you need to include somebody that has that expertise. Otherwise, you're doomed to fail. But like I said, that's a whole different story. I do want to be conscious of the time. We're at the end of our hour, and this was a whole lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed this discussion with all of you. This was a lot of fun. I hope if all of you are up for it, maybe we can do this again at some point. And I do want to thank you all for spending this hour together. I really enjoyed it. And I do want to thank our audience for tuning in. We'll make sure to make a better recording of this video available for all of you to be shared later. So thank you, everyone. And thanks for tuning in.